The Gift by Vladimir Nabokov, a book which represents something of an ode and also a farewell to a certain time in the author's life. So, Vladimir Nabokov, I'm quite sure, likely needs no introduction, but this book, The Gift, might, because it is not his most well known novel. That would obviously probably be Lolita. But The Gift is it's either the last book or one of the last books at the very least that he wrote in his native language of Russian. And it is something of an homage and also kind of a goodbye to his time spent living as an emigre in Berlin. The book is somewhat autobiographical, even though Nabokov disclaims any notions of autobiography. It still definitely is. So, what is the story of The Gift? What is this book actually about? Well, uh, kind of, again, hewing somewhat close to Vladimir Nabokov's life, the book concerns a character named Fyodor Godunov Cherdintsev. Maybe I'm pronouncing that right, who is, like his author, a Russian emigre living in Berlin in the early 20th century after the communist revolution in Russia. And he is trying to make a go of it as a writer in the emigre scene, much like Nabokov himself did. His father was a lepidopterist, also a trait of of the authors, and also an explorer who disappeared while on an expedition. And our main character, Fyodor, is involved in a relationship with a young woman named Zena. Uh, this book really doesn't have a whole lot in the way of plot. It's more kind of a vibe type thing. But the book is structured very, very interestingly, and I'll explain that as we go. But anyway, so the book is largely concerned with Fyodor trying to get stuff published, trying to make it as a writer, and again his romantic relationship with this young woman named Zena, and also some kind of reminiscences on his life in pre-communist Russia and the disappearance of his father and the kind of unresolved feelings pertaining to that. But then eventually, our main character decides to write a book, a biography of sorts of the real life Russian writer Nikolai Chernyshevsky, who is the author of the very influential book What Is to Be Done, which greatly inspired the Bolsheviks, particularly Lenin. In fact, Vladimir Lenin actually named a pamphlet of his after the book What Is to Be Done. So Fyodor, our main character, undertakes to write this biography of sorts of this figure. And then we actually get to read that book within this book. There's like about like a 90 odd page section in this book where we get to read what he has written. It's kind of a nesting doll thing. It's a book within a book. And it's kind of an unflattering biography. It was so unflattering, actually, that in real life, when this book was published, this book was initially published serially in an emigre magazine of the time, but the publishers of the magazine refused, apparently, to publish this chapter of the book because even though they had fled communist Russia, apparently Nikolai Chernyshevsky was such a venerated name in Russian literature that even they didn't want to publish this book within the book, this biography of the figure, because it's kind of, again, unflattering. But we get to read this book within a book, and again, it's kind of an unflattering look at this personage's life, and it also kind of pokes fun at his literary sensibilities. Vladimir Nabokov does not hold Chernyshevsky in particularly high regard as in terms of artistry. So we get that, and then after that, when we return to the actual narrative of the story, that book is kind of it causes a stir. It generates some buzz after its publication within the world of the book's story, and so Fyodor's uh, prospects as regards his literary ambitions seem to be looking up, and he is kind of advancing his relationship with Xena. And then at the end of the book, he describes to her his intent to write a book based upon these experiences of his, which essentially describes the book itself, the gift. So the book ends in this kind of like Mobius strip fashion where it's almost like a circular narrative where at the end of the book the main character declares his intent to write effectively the book itself. So it all kind of comes back around again. Again, it's kind of a circular narrative thing, which I really liked. I like that kind of thing. And of course, Nabokov is always one to toy with and tinker with the conventions of narrative. That definitely comes into play towards the end of this book, where it again becomes kind of this Mobius strip thing. So that's the story of the gift. That is the tale which this book tells. So let's talk about the technical qualities of the book. So the writing, it's roundly fabulous. I mean, this is freaking Nabokov, one of the most acclaimed writers of the 20th century, and for good reason. This book makes very plain why that is. The prose is very sumptuous, very elegant. There's so much flair to this. It's so artful. Some interesting word choice as well. There are some words in here that you might not be familiar with, but it's just roundly excellent. It's the actual narration though is interesting because it slips in and out of third person and first person narration. And again, I think that kind of ties in with the ending of the book where the main character Fyodor declares his intent to write what is in essence this book itself. So it's kind of, I think you can retroactively view that kind of as him, the main character who becomes the author of this book, kind of it's his voice breaking through because it's narrated initially in like a third person fashion, and it more or less maintains that throughout the majority of the book. But there are times when it just like slips into first person narration kind of at random. It's a very intriguing effect, and again, I think it kind of ties in with the way that this book concludes. But interesting stuff. Roundly, the writing is again excellent. It is a very well written book, and it shows why Nabokov's name is held in such high regard when it comes to writing. So now on to the characters. Well, our main character, Fyodor Godunov-Chernintsev, who is somewhat analogous to Nabokov himself, even though he again kind of disclaims that to an extent. He is still kind of an analog character of sorts to a certain degree, anyway. He is a pretty good character. This book is also kind of remarkable in Nabokov's catalog in that it is not really sordid. Like, Lolita, very memorable book, very fabulously written book, but like the narrator and main character of that book is, a depraved pedophile, basically. And that, there are other books of Nabokov's that concern sordid subject matter, like Ben Sinister, which is probably my favorite of Nabokov's books, actually. That's about, a man trying to protect and shelter his son in the face of this oppressive regime, and it ends not in the happiest fashion for that character. But a lot of Nabokov's books kind of deal with, again, sordid subject matter, but this book is kind of remarkable in his oeuvre because it's kind of optimistic, actually. It's kind of Bildungsroman to a certain extent, I suppose, of this character as he matures artistically, and we actually again get to see the what he produces literarily in this book when we get to read the book within the book, which is the thing that the main character of the book has written. And we see a lot of like reminiscences of his pertaining to his father, and there's kind of again some unresolved emotional stuff there. And also we see his love life as in regards to this woman. It's the main character of this book is pretty well done. The secondary characters are not a single character, I would say, besides the main character has really any depth at all. It's very much focused on this one character, but such as it is, I think it works because it's something of like a Bildungsroman. It's the coming of age of this young artist, kind of a portrait of the artist as a young man, if you will. And I think where it counts, it works. So I'll give it a pass. The main character is pretty well rendered, I think. Now on to the actual story. This is definitely the most interesting aspect of this book for me because, again, Nabokov is toying with the very conventions of narrative, which is something that he loved to do. Like Lolita is presented as a fictitious memoir forwarded by a fictitious introduction by a fictitious psychologist. It's a fake confession, if you will. Again, Ben Sinister, that book ends in a very metafictional way, which is part of the reason why I love that book so much, and it's probably my favorite of his books, because it just comes totally out of left field the way that book actually concludes. And then, of course, probably most famously, there's Pale Fire, which really pushed the boundaries of like how stories are told, because you can actually read that book differently depending on your persuasion. You can read it all the way through, or you can like read and then flip back and forth and stuff like that. That was a very daring book in terms of the way that the story is structured. The Gift also showcases Nabokov's affinity for toying with narrative convention, because this book again really doesn't have much in the way of plot. It's just kind of a Bildungsroman of this young writer. But at a certain point, again, we get to read a book within the book, which is the book that the fictitious main character has written, which is it is a biography of a real life figure by a fictitious character. Kind of interesting there. But then, as I said at the end, when the main character declares his intent to write what is essentially this book. So it's, once more, it's kind of like a circular narrative, like a Mobius strip. It all kind of goes around in the end. And I just love the hell out of that. That's why I like Nabokov so much, because he really did kind of push the boundaries when it came to like the very structure, the very nature of narrative. I love that. And I really liked The Gift a lot. It may not be as famous as Lolita, but it's right up there probably in terms of quality. I would say this is some A tier stuff right here. So like, to rate The Gift, I think I'll give this book a flat A. I really do. I think it's a pretty fantastic book. It's a little slow going. Like, if you aren't one for kind of ponderous, artistically inclined stories, by that I mean stories actually like about art and artistry, this might not be up your alley. And also, to fully appreciate The Gift, I would say that one would need to be very well versed in Russian literature, because not only is this book an ode sort of to Nabokov's own time living as an emigre in Berlin, the book is also, more than that, an ode to Russian literature. And literature has kind of long been what one could argue is Russia's like biggest contribution to the world. I've read some Russian literature. I've read War and Peace. I've read several of Dostoevsky's books, but I think to fully appreciate the gift, one would have to be very, very, very well versed in Russian literature, because there is a lot of discussion pertaining to the Russian literary tradition in this book. But yeah, I love this book, really. I thought it was great, so I'm going to give it an A. So, The Gift by Vladimir Nabokov. Have you read this book? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said about it here today. And if you haven't read The Gift, if you are a fan of Nabokov, I could definitely recommend picking this up. I think it's a great book. Might not be as well known as some of his other books, again, namely Lolita, but it's a pretty fantastic crackerjack work in its own right. And like I say, I could really recommend it. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.